Okay, so let's talk about the kind of story that detonates online before anybody has even had time to make coffee properly. You know the type. You open your phone, you blink twice, and suddenly half the internet is acting like it has uncovered the final secret chapter in a very expensive, very chaotic, very badly supervised royal thriller. Names are flying around. Screenshots are everywhere. People are speaking with the confidence of prosecutors, historians, psychics, and uninvited dinner guests all at once. And sitting right in the middle of that digital hurricane are Meghan, Harry, Andrew, the palace, America, Britain, old power, new fame, and that very familiar question that always comes back in stories like this. Who knew what, when, and how close did any of these circles really get? And before we go any further, let's keep our feet on the ground for a second, because this is where people online tend to float clean out of the atmosphere. A name appearing in documents, a contact list, an email chain, a guest log, or some second-hand reference is not the same thing as proving wrongdoing. It just is. The internet loves to act like a mention equals a conviction, and that is how you end up with millions of people doing courtroom theater from their kitchen tables. So let's be serious, let's be fair, and let's walk through why this story has people in the US, the UK, and basically every Royal Watcher group chat on Earth staring at their screens like, hold on, what exactly are we looking at here? Because that's the real hook. Not just the names. The pattern. The overlap. The way these worlds keep brushing against each other like strangers at a private party where nobody quite wants to explain who invited whom. And honestly, for scandal watchers, this is catnip. This is top-shelf, extra-aged, imported catnip. Because if there is one thing people have suspected for years, it is that elite circles are much smaller than they pretend to be. Finance, entertainment, philanthropy, politics, royalty, activism, celebrity media, private dinners, charity galas, luxury estates, exclusive conferences that are somehow attended by all the same people every time, as if there are only 14 rich people on Earth and they are all trapped in a WhatsApp group together. That is what makes a story like this feel so explosive even before anyone proves anything concrete. It plays into a fear people already have, which is that the powerful live in a giant velvetrope maze of introductions, favors, soft connections, and selective memory. And once that fear gets activated, every old photo, every dinner, every handshake, every guest list starts glowing in people's minds like it contains the meaning of life. So now you've got Meghan's name being discussed in connection with these broader document releases, and instantly the internet does what it always does with Meghan Markle. It doesn't whisper, it doesn't cautiously speculate, it doesn't say, let's wait for the full record and distinguish between contact, proximity, awareness, and participation. Oh no, it puts on a cape, grabs a ring light, and starts narrating like it's season 8 of a prestige crime show. And that is where things get interesting. Because Meghan is one of those rare public figures who triggers multiple audiences at once. You have royal watchers, you have celebrity watchers, you have anti-celebrity watchers, which is a whole sport in itself. You have people who think she was treated horribly. You have people who think she is the center of every storm on purpose. You have Americans who see one story, Britons who see another, and international viewers who mainly sit there with popcorn thinking, you people are never beating the drama allegations. So the moment her name appears in any broader elite network conversation, nobody reacts normally. Nobody. One side says this proves everything. Another side says it proves nothing. A third side says it's all a smear. A fourth side says the smear and the scandal can both exist at the same time. And then somewhere in the middle are the exhausted normal people muttering, can someone please show the actual context before we all lose our minds? That middle group, by the way, is my favorite group. They never get enough appreciation. They are carrying civilization on their backs. Now if you zoom out, the deeper tension here is not just about one duchess or one prince or one disgraced financier or one embattled palace. It is about access. That's the word sitting underneath all of this like a live wire. Access. Who gets in? Who gets invited? Who gets introduced? who is useful to whom, who makes the guest list, who is copied on the email, who is mentioned because someone wants to impress someone else, who becomes part of a social orbit without even realizing how ugly that orbit might be. Because that's one of the nastiest truths about elite scandal. It is not always neat. It is not always a scene out of a movie where a villain twirls a glass and announces the evil plan. Sometimes it is just proximity, vanity, ambition, social climbing, a bad read on somebody's reputation, a friend, of a donor, of a host, of a producer, of a patron, of a charity. It's messy. It's layered. It's often morally murky long before it's legally clear. And that ambiguity is exactly why the public gets so transfixed. They're not just asking, was there wrongdoing? They're asking, how does this machine work? And once that question starts rolling, it does not stop at Meghan. Because then the lens swings to Harry. And Harry is fascinating in this story for a different reason. He is not usually framed by the public as some social network strategist carefully maneuvering through elite rooms. His brand, for years now, has been wounded truth-teller, rebel prince, estranged insider, the man who left the institution but cannot stop being defined by it. So when his name gets dragged anywhere near murky overlapping circles, people react with that special kind of outrage reserved for somebody whose image is built on moral clarity. You can almost hear the internet saying, wait a minute, you gave us speeches, you gave us documentaries, you gave us interviews, you gave us the face, the tone, the posture, the whole. We're stepping away from toxic systems energy. So what exactly did you know, what did you not know, and how far away were you really from all of this? That is the pressure point. Not that a mention proves guilt. Again, it does not. But because public image and private networks are two very different things, and when they clash, people become absolutely feral. And then, looming over all of it, like a dark Victorian portrait nobody wants to acknowledge, is hanging in the hall, is Andrew. Now with Andrew, the reaction is different, colder, heavier, less speculative, more weary. People already bring a mountain of suspicion, disgust, and public memory to his name. So when anything new appears in the broader ecosystem around Epstein-related reporting, Andrew doesn't get the benefit of fresh surprise. He gets that grim public stare that says, what now? And from the palace perspective, that is where the real nightmare begins. Because institutions can survive scandal more easily than they can survive pattern. One scandal, you deny. Second scandal, you distance. Third scandal, you restructure, rephrase, review, relaunch, and hide behind very polished statements delivered in voices, so calm they practically come with velvet curtains. But when the public starts seeing a pattern, that's when the walls shake. Pattern suggests culture. Pattern suggests tolerance. Pattern suggests not just one bad actor, but an environment in which certain people move too easily, too comfortably, too repeatedly through spaces of prestige and access. And once people start asking whether the palace, the celebrity world, the donor class, and the philanthropic class were all mingling in ways they shouldn't have been, no royal statement on earth is going to feel big enough. That's why this kind of story hits so hard across the Atlantic too. In America, people look at royalty with a strange combination of fascination, skepticism, and entertainment value. It's like watching a luxury family business run by ghosts, traditions, and press offices. Americans are often less emotionally loyal to the institution itself, so they tend to go straight for the scandal mechanics. Who benefited, who was protected, who spun what, who got thrown under the carriage. Very American response, very on brand. In the UK, though, it lands differently. Because there the monarchy is not just content, it is structure, it is symbol, it is history, continuity, identity, awkward pageantry, inherited furniture, and a national habit of pretending not to be obsessed while being completely obsessed. So when a story starts dragging royal names into the orbit of wider elite corruption narratives, it doesn't just feel embarrassing, it feels destabilizing. That's why you see this split-screen reaction. America says, this is wild. Britain says, this is serious. The internet says, refresh, refresh, refresh. And the rest of the world says, you people really made crowns and tabloids into a permanent reality show. Now let's talk about Meghan specifically, because she sits at the most combustible intersection of all of this. Before she was a duchess, she was a working actress, a public figure rising through entertainment and advocacy spaces, moving through exactly the kind of rooms where influence likes to dress itself up as generosity. That's part of why this conversation has so much fuel. People know those spaces are full of introductions. Producers know donors, donors know hosts, hosts know politicians, politicians know fixers, fixers know everyone. And somewhere in the middle of that social soup, a lot of names pass through a lot of inboxes. So when the public hears that Meghan's name allegedly appears in different contexts, the question immediately becomes not just, was she there, but what kind of there are we talking about? Was it an invitation never accepted? A forwarded mention? A social aspiration from somebody else? A copied email? A charity overlap? An event list? A contact entry? A proposed introduction? A vanity reference from someone trying to sound connected? Those are not the same thing, not even close. But online, nuance lasts about 6 seconds, 7 if Mercury is in retrograde and everybody has eaten. So the story gets flattened into something much more cinematic. And look, I get why. A complicated matrix of partial social overlap is not sexy. It doesn't trend. It doesn't make people drop their tea. What trends is the idea that a duchess, a prince, a disgraced royal uncle, and a dead financier all somehow exist in one giant web of influence. That image is irresistible to the public imagination, especially when people already distrust the elite classes. And that is where the media machine starts doing what it does best. It starts correlating timelines. This year with that year. This gala with that trip. This speech with that donor. This appearance with that rumored introduction. And some of that work is legitimate. Some of it is necessary. Some of it is exactly what journalists should do when public interest is this high. But some of it, let's be honest, is pure theater. It is building mood from fragments. It is string and pinboard energy. It is a dramatic soundtrack in article form. You know the style. Questions are being raised. Fresh scrutiny has emerged. Insiders say the atmosphere is tense. Very elegant way of saying, nobody knows yet, but everybody is sweating. If you're enjoying this breakdown, by the way, subscribe now, because this is one of those stories where every new detail changes the emotional temperature, and you already know the next few rounds of reactions are going to be absolutely unhinged. Also comment with this. Do you think stories like this expose real structural problems, or do you think the internet turns social overlap into guilt way too fast? Because that line matters a lot here. Now the palace side of this deserves its own spotlight, because palace strategy is always fascinating when the ground starts moving. Publicly, institutions always want to sound measured. Grave concern, full cooperation, appropriate authorities, ongoing process, confidence in due course, you know the language. The kind of statement that feels like it was assembled by 3 lawyers, 2 courtiers, and 1 person whose only job is to remove all traces of human emotion. But beneath that polished language, the real question is survival. What are they protecting? The crown, the current king, the heir, the long game, the brand, the constitutional mystique, the illusion that the institution is sturdier than the people inside it. Because make no mistake, this is where William starts looking important in the public imagination, not necessarily because he says the most. Usually he says very little, but because in a moment like this, silence itself becomes part of the role. He becomes the face of containment, continuity, the next chapter, the person the system quietly leans toward when it wants to signal, whatever this mess is, the future is not supposed to look like that. And that's a powerful contrast. Andrew represents decay. Harry represents rupture. Meghan represents disruption. William, in this framing, represents repair. Whether that's fair or not is a separate conversation, but politically and symbolically, that is how these narratives begin arranging themselves. And once the public starts arranging people into those roles, it becomes much harder for anyone to break out of them. That is especially true for Harry and Meghan, because they've spent years trying to tell their own story while also being trapped inside stories other people tell about them. Victim, villain, escapee, opportunist, reformer, hypocrite, truth-teller, attention seeker. Depending on who's watching, they are one of those things or all of them before breakfast. So when a storm like this arrives, they don't get treated like blank slates. They get treated like already written characters entering a new plot twist. And honestly, that might be the most dangerous part of all. Because when people stop evaluating evidence on its own terms and start filtering everything through pre-existing characters, facts become costumes. They just get dressed to fit the role. That doesn't mean the story is fake. It doesn't mean there are no real questions. It doesn't mean the overlaps don't matter. It means the audience is no longer neutral. And a non-neutral audience can make any scandal feel solved long before it is understood. Now think about the Sussex camp for a second. Just imagine the mood. Lawyers, advisors, communications people, maybe a few very tired staffers staring at timelines, names, invitations, affiliations, donor histories, event records, everything. Not because every appearance of a name means catastrophe, but because in a media environment like this, context is oxygen. If you don't provide it fast, other people provide it for you, and they are usually far less generous. That's why crisis response in stories like this is never just about innocence or guilt. It is about narrative speed, who frames first, who defines the meaning of a mention, who explains an overlap before it hardens into implication. Because once implication goes viral, truth is jogging behind with one shoe untied. And if we're being brutally honest, this is exactly why the public is so hooked on these power network stories. They force people to confront something uncomfortable. The elite don't always operate through obvious conspiracy. Often they operate through familiarity, through nice rooms, shared causes, mutual contacts, glossy events, respectable language, and 1,000 tiny moments where nobody asks enough questions because everybody assumes somebody else already did. That is how rot hides. Not always in darkness. Sometimes in chandeliers. And yes, that sounds dramatic, but tell me I'm wrong. This is also why the philanthropy angle makes people especially nervous, because charity, advocacy, and global initiatives can be real and worthwhile, but they can also become social passports, moral perfume, reputation laundering with canapés, a way for powerful people to stand near good causes and borrow the glow. So the second any controversial name brushes against that ecosystem, the public starts wondering whether noble language was being used as camouflage. Again, that doesn't automatically mean it was. But the suspicion is there, and once people have seen enough scandals over the years, they don't easily give elite networks the benefit of the doubt. And that brings us to the bigger emotional charge in all of this. It's not just that people are shocked. A lot of people are tired. Tired of privilege acting accidental. Tired of influence hiding behind formality. Tired of institutions telling the public to trust processes that always seem to move faster for ordinary people and slower for titled ones. Tired of the same names, the same circles, the same denials, the same no further comment choreography. So when documents, records, references, or investigations start shining a light into those circles, people don't just react to the specific names involved. They react to years of pent-up suspicion. That's why even peripheral mentions can explode politically and culturally. Because the public is no longer just asking about individual conduct. They are asking whether an entire world was too comfortable with itself for too long. And for royal watchers, that is irresistible because the monarchy survives on symbolism. It survives on the idea that it stands above ordinary mess. Not morally perfect, obviously, because nobody believes that anymore, but at least somehow structured, dignified, ceremonial, bounded by duty. The problem is that scandal drags symbolism down to floor level. It reminds everyone that behind the uniforms, titles, crests, and carefully choreographed balcony moments, these are still people navigating money, ego, image, relationships, loyalties, resentments, and fear. Suddenly, the palace stops looking like a monument and starts looking like a family business with a very expensive archive. And that's when the audience leans in even closer. Not because it's noble, because it's human. Messy, flawed, defensive, strategic, painfully human. So where does that leave Meghan in the public imagination right now? In a very dangerous place, honestly. Not legally, not conclusively, not in any final sense. But narratively, yes. Because she is a person onto whom huge numbers of people already project suspicion or sympathy. A new controversy doesn't meet neutrality. It meets appetite. Some viewers will decide that any document mention is devastating. Some will decide the whole thing is a bad faith attack. Some will wait for evidence. Some will pretend to wait for evidence while clearly having picked a side 3 bus stops ago. And somewhere inside all that noise is the thing that actually matters: context. What exactly was the nature of the mention? What was the degree of connection? What was known at the time? What was casual overlap? And what, if anything, went beyond that? Who is spinning? Who is leaking? Who benefits from attaching which names to which storylines? Those are boring questions to people who want instant scandal. But they are the only useful questions. Everything else is theater. Now let me say something that scandal watchers hate hearing, but absolutely need to hear. Sometimes the ugliest stories are not the ones where a dramatic hidden mastermind gets exposed in one clean moment. Sometimes the ugliest stories are the ones where nobody looks good, nobody looks fully clear, nobody looks fully central, and what emerges instead is a portrait of a culture where too many people floated too close to dangerous circles because access was intoxicating and scrutiny came too late. That kind of story is harder to package, harder to hashtag, harder to sell as heroes and villains. But it is often closer to reality. And if that is what this becomes, then the real fallout won't just be about one duchess or one prince or one royal disgrace. It will be about how modern power actually behaves when it puts on a tuxedo, calls itself philanthropy, and sends invitations with very elegant fonts. Which, frankly, should worry everyone a lot more than one headline. So yes, people will keep zooming in on Meghan. Yes, people will keep bringing Harry into it. Yes, Andrew will remain the darkest name hanging over the entire conversation. Yes, William and the palace will be judged on whether they look reactive or serious. Yes, every old clip, quote, appearance, and relationship will be dug up and re-examined by people with too much time and suspiciously good Wi-Fi. That part is inevitable. What matters now is whether the public, the press, and the institutions involved can separate contact from conduct, association from proof, and image from evidence. Because if they can't, then the truth gets buried under the performance of outrage. And if they can, then maybe, finally, these elite circles stop getting to hide in the fog of prestige. That's the real stakes here. Not just who gets embarrassed, who gets understood. Not just who gets named. What gets exposed. Not just what one file, one list, one entry, or one report appears to suggest. But whether this moment forces a deeper reckoning with the machinery of influence itself. And honestly, that is the part I keep coming back to. The machinery. The invisible social engine. The one that moves people into rooms, into projects, into charities, into introductions, into relevance, into danger. The one that always looks glamorous from the outside until suddenly it doesn't. Because once you see that engine, really see it, you can't unsee it. You start recognizing the same pattern everywhere. In politics, in entertainment, in foundations, in old money, in new fame, in every room where reputations are traded like currency. And the monarchy, whether it likes it or not, is now being forced to answer whether it was merely adjacent to that machine, vulnerable to it, blind to it, or more entangled in it than anybody wanted to admit. That is why this story matters beyond the gossip. And yes, of course the gossip is part of why everybody clicked. Let's not lie to ourselves. Human beings are nosy, we always will be. Half of civilization is built on curiosity, and the other half is built on pretending our curiosity is very principled. Fine, I accept that, you accept that, we move. But beneath the gossip is a more serious question about accountability in circles that have traditionally floated above it. And that question is not going away. So as this develops, watch the language carefully. Watch who speaks quickly and who goes silent. Watch who emphasizes process and who emphasizes perception. Watch who tries to narrow the frame and who tries to widen it. Watch whether the palace looks merely cautious or genuinely committed to transparency. Watch whether media outlets distinguish between mention and misconduct, because that distinction is not optional if they want to be taken seriously. And maybe most importantly, watch your own reaction. Are you reacting to evidence or to a character you already thought you knew? Because in stories like this, that difference is everything. Anyway, that is where this gets genuinely chilling to me. Not the splashy headline, not the dramatic montage version. The deeper possibility that what we are looking at is not one shocking twist, but a map. A map of how status protects itself, how ambition drifts, how institutions delay, how names travel, how circles overlap, and how the public only starts seeing the pattern when the cracks are already too loud to ignore. And when that happens, nobody gets to hide behind glamour forever. Not Hollywood, not philanthropy, not royalty, not the people who claim they were only nearby, not the people who insist they knew nothing, not the institutions that spent years acting like appearances were the same thing as integrity. So yes, the public is staring at the names, but the real story is the architecture around them. And that architecture, once exposed, is a lot harder to rebuild than a reputation. Let me know in the comments where you think this goes next. Does this become a wider reckoning about elite networks? Does it stay trapped in tabloid warfare? Does the palace come out looking stronger because it cooperates, or weaker because the whole thing happened anywhere near royal orbit in the first place? And where do Harry and Meghan go from here if every old overlap starts getting dragged into the spotlight? There is a lot more to unpack here, and I have a feeling this story is nowhere near finished. Thank you for watching.